Welcome back to Combat Mission Battle for Normandy for the 10th mission of the Scottish Corridor campaign. We are back with the 9th Cameronians, who were left back in Mission 3, having taken and held the village of Liho-de-Bosque. The Cameronians have spent most of the next 2 days of Epsom reorganising and then moving to exploit the hole made by the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders in the German lines. After rendezvousing with Churchill tanks from 9th Royal Tank Regiment at Colville, the Cameronians have now swung west, north of Mondrenville, to attack the village of Grainville and secure the right flank of the British penetration. Grainville itself is spread over a wide area, consisting of a few clusters of buildings surrounded by orchards and small farm complexes. The Cameronians are approaching from the northeast, with a railway line and road on their right, and there is a band of open fields in between them and the village orchards. The mission is to seize the two main building clusters, Objective Bishop in the centre with the village church and a big L-shaped building, and the crossroads of Objective Rook on the left. Bishop is worth 250 victory points, Rook 150, and there's another 250 available for destroying the enemy, plus the standard by now 100 for keeping friendly casualties below 20%. Speaking of friendly casualties, I have 9th Cameronians D Company for this mission, back up to full strength, with a scout carrier platoon from the Battalion Support Company. There are also 10 and 11 troops of Churchill tanks from 9th Royal Tank Regiment. Each troop is commanded by a Churchill 4, which has a 6-pounder gun, leading a pair of Churchill 6s armed with the 75mm. Broadly speaking, the 6-pounder is more effective against enemy armour due to its higher velocity, while the 75s are better against infantry because bigger shells can carry much more high explosive. There are no reinforcements coming in, but a 2-tube section of the battalion 3-inch mortars are on call at the beginning of the mission, and after 5 minutes a 4-gun troop of 25-pounders will become available. As for the enemy, they're definitely here. Earlier in the day, elements of the 11th Armoured Division lost a recce tank outside the church, apparently to German armour, so we can expect enemy armour and supporting infantry. My main concern going in is going to be the enemy anti-tank threat. I finally have a combined arms force again, where I can use direct fire from the tanks and indirect fire from off-map artillery to tackle enemy positions the infantry will struggle with. So in broad strokes, the plan is to advance with the scouts and the infantry, make contact with the enemy, and then neutralise them using an appropriate combination of arms. More specifically, I'm really looking at the road on the right flank. Pushing down here, with the railway cutting providing a covered route for infantry, would allow me to bypass any defensive screen on the close side of Grainville and put me in position to support attacks on Le Chesnay and then Objective Bishop. Getting the tanks into position may be more difficult than it looks. They essentially have to follow the road, which may expose them to fire from the front of the village and to fire from depth through a gap in the bocage lining the road. Not to mention the possibility of mines, it's an obvious route. But I think it's a more palatable option than tackling any German defence head on. Time may be an issue, I've only got an hour for this, but at the same time, experience in this campaign so far leads me to think that the advantages of preserving my force outweigh the advantages of securing my objectives. Or in other words, while the clock is important, I'm not inclined to start taking risks just because time is running out. Leaving the deployment zone, there is no immediate resistance. Le Hort's fence is clear, the first field on the right is clear, there's no sign of any enemy activity at the Fern de Bray or La Chesnay. In fact, the only sign of any enemy activity at all are some roadblocks on the railway road. These are impassable to my tanks and there's no way in combat mission to remove them, so it looks like I won't be able to bring the Churchills into action from the entire length of the railway. That's an annoyance which may have tactical implications, but as of yet it's hardly a major problem. They'll simply have to do what they can up to the first block and then push towards the village via Le Chesnay. It's not until the 14-minute mark that I get any enemy contacts at all, 2 armour contacts on the edge of Objective Bishop. Courtesy of my scouts and infantry peering through the bocage, these quickly resolve into Panthers. Enemy tanks go straight to the top of my target list. Just by being there, and they're in a pretty good mutually supporting right angle, they're forcing me to play things carefully with my Churchills. Churchills are tough, but they're not going to win against the Panther in a head-to-head fight. I need to get onto their flanks to hit the thinner side armour. That means I either need to totally change up my avenue of approach and attack Bishop from the centre of the map, or get some kind of anti-tank asset out to the far right. So suddenly those roadblocks have a lot more tactical significance. They mean I can't get my tanks into a flanking position on the right-hand Panther. I can get infantry through and along the bocage, but the German tanks are way out of Piet range, so if I want to work that angle, I'll need to close the distance through the orchards. The good news is that I've found the enemy and quickly identified what is probably the main component of the anti-tank threat. If I can knock those two Panthers out of the fight, then the way should be clear for a combined arms attack on Bishop. It's going to take time to get into position for that though, so in the meantime I start calling in the 25 pounders on the German tanks. With any luck, the threat of artillery will encourage them to move off or do some subsystem damage that will help even out the eventual engagement. Of course, pushing infantry to the right is not as easy as it looks. Despite being the second team to move through the first barricade, the scout section HQ leader finds a landmine. Much further down the railway, the company's sniper team mirrors their experience, revealing that there is potentially a mine threat all the way down the road. This isn't ideal, and I don't have any engineers to mark paths, but at least the mines are clearly not covered by fire. Closer in, I've pushed some scouts into La Chesnay, revealing that that's clear too. This is good news. The buildings and high walls block the Panthers' line of sight, so I can use them as shields for the Churchill and my infantry as they move forward. They're also just within Piet range of the Panthers. I want to stack the deck with as many options as possible, so I send one of the Piet teams forward to get into position. They've barely gotten through the gap in the bocage when the Piet gunner is cut down by MG fire from the far right. There's a diagonal at the map edge that makes a good enfilade position, another complication, but at least one I can sink my teeth into. The scout carriers are sitting in the railway cutting, so I load them up with a section and send them off down the line to hit the MG position from the rear. The cutting itself provides cover up to the final moment, allowing the section to get right up close and polish off the Germans without any problems. That reopens the route into La Chesnay and gives me the opportunity to open a new angle of observation on Bishop. There are more mines in the road, but most of the section gets through. It's risky, but carefully squeezing some infantry across the road here might allow me to exert some pressure via the far right and, with some luck, get a Piet into range on the flank of the closest Panther. Trying to exploit, however, reveals enemy infantry in the L-shaped building. By now I've edged the Churchills of 10 troop forward, and I'm able to get a line on the offending position without exposing one of my tanks to the Panthers. This is all, however, mostly speculative work around the edges. After half an hour, I'm not really any closer to seizing the objectives, and the Panthers are still resolutely in the way. The 25 pounders are coming in at least, and as I manoeuvre the Churchills, there are some unintentional engagements. 10 Troops HQ, with their 57mm gun, spots the left-hand Panther through the orchard and pancakes around on the turret front. The Panther reacts, pivoting, and the Churchill dings another round on the armour before managing to score a penetration through the road wheels. It doesn't look like it's done much. The Panther's still up and running, though it pops smoke and reverses off. It disappears behind the L-shaped building, which opens up an opportunity. With only one Panther to deal with, I might be able to fix its attention to the front with 2 of 10 Troops tanks, whilst getting the remaining one onto its flank. But the first Panther is already moving back into position by the end of the turn, and the opportunity essentially evaporates. The smoke screen is still there, blocking the Panther from covering its field of fire, so I could take the chance and move on its companion, but Churchills are slow, and the smoke will inevitably dissipate. With my newfound focus on force preservation, it feels like too much of a risk. The 25 pounders continue falling though, and after a few minutes, some of my infantry spot the distinct black uniforms of panzer crewmen running around in the open. The smoke clears to reveal a hole in the first Panther's engine deck. It's been hit by the artillery and knocked out. Progress at last, but I'm starting to get impatient. There's now only 20 minutes left on the clock, and I basically haven't made any ground in the last 20. I have started putting pressure on the centre, moving 11 Troop up with one of the rifle platoons and trying to snuff out German infantry in the houses and gardens across the street from the church, but it's slow going. I can start shuffling elements into position though. On the right, after the enemy infantry in the L-shaped building have been pummeled into silence, I have some infantry squeeze through the bocage and advance across the orchard to get onto the flank of the last panther. I'm also moving 10 troops HQ round towards the centre, ready to take advantage of that position when it's clear, but I misjudged the angles again. 10 troop HQ and the panther spot each other through a gap in the buildings and both get a shot off. The Churchill is quicker, putting a penetration into the front of the turret, but the panther immediately reciprocates. A bigger shell with greater post-penetration effects, the panther's 75mm AP round punches straight through the Churchill's turret, killing 2 of the crew. The others bail out, and the panther immediately takes a 25-pounder shell to the top of the turret and brews up. Having chalked 1 unexpected tank kill up to the artillery, I'd adjusted the 25-pounder mission onto the second tank. While the shrapnel effects of artillery against armour seem undermodelled in combat mission, direct hits are still a possibility. It seems like a very brute force, statistical way of getting the job done, but in the same turn there are 2 more hits on the Panthers that would either have knocked them out, or at the very least severely degraded their performance. And just like that, the enemy anti-tank threat has almost been dealt with. There's a 75mm Pact 40 out on the right that still poses a threat, but it's functionally immobile, and I already have a cluster of infantry teams bearing down on it, coincidentally in position to switch to the AT gun now that their original target has been knocked out. It takes a few more minutes to mop up the pack. The crew really don't want to give up, but once that's out of action, it's open season on Objective Bishop. And it's a good thing too, because I don't have long left, with the rest of the 25-pounders expending on the L-shaped building, followed by the 3-inch mortars. I start moving my infantry up under cover of the Churchill. There is resistance, and that resistance is crushed in short order. The full combined arms team can go to work here. Infantry storm the church, the L-shaped building is cleared out, a random enemy half-track full of infantry is knocked out, and the difficult part of the battle switches from breaking into the objective to finding the last little nests of defenders and snuffing them out. I'm lucky that the game goes into overtime. My flanking party on the right, backed up by one of the Churchills, is able to clear out German mortar pits behind Bishop, while infantry teams scour the back buildings for stragglers to be mopped up. 63 minutes in, the Germans surrender. That makes it a total victory for me by default. With another turn or so I would have totally cleared Bishop out, and, while the enemy still has troops in ruck, I've inflicted heavy losses on them. 61 dead, 27 wounded and 2 men taken prisoner, as well as knocking out the 2 Panthers and the half-track. This has come at the price of 14 of my own dead and 12 wounded. 6 of those were to mines, but the rest were essentially down to general battlefield attrition. There were a few standout casualty events, but in hindsight they felt a lot worse than they actually were and only involved a few men at a time. After the battle, they're hard to pick out from the background. I've even managed to get away with a hit on 10 Troop HQ. Although the crew bailed, the tank itself is apparently not damaged badly enough to count as a loss. I have to say I really wasn't expecting this result. 2/3 of the way through, it was looking a lot like this softly force preservation approach wasn't going to get the job done. Ultimately though, once the anti-tank threat had been dealt with, the conditions were in place to move surprisingly quickly. That's it for this mission though. The Cameronians have taken Grainville and propped up the flank of the British penetration. In the next mission, the Germans are going to try and take it back. It's going to be messy. The mission is even called Nowhere to Hide, which doesn't exactly fill me with confidence. Hope you all enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next one.